is Focus with Jack Caudill.
Good evening, I'm Jack Caudill. Welcome to this month's edition of Focus, talking about the 2015 session of the South Dakota State Legislature. 3 legislators here to talk about that with us. Representative Brian Gosch, a Republican from District 32 here in Rapid City. He is the House Majority Leader. Senator Craig Teason, a Republican from District 34, also here in Rapid City. And Republican Kevin Killer, a Democrat from District 27. He is from Pine Ridge. His district encompasses Bennett, Hawken, Jackson, part of Pennington, and also down in Shannon County. As I said, the 90th session of the South Dakota State Legislature gets started in Pierre on January 13th. 39 days on the legislative calendar this year. It all wraps up on March 30th. That is set aside to consider vetoes of Governor Dennis Daugaard. And money in the budget always seems to be the big debate in Pierre every year. Is that going to be the case again this time around?
It certainly will be, Jack. And thanks for having me on to start off. I think this is about the 5th time I've done this show.
Because you do it so well.
It's always a pleasure to do that. There's a lot of groups out there asking for money. They all make a pretty strong case for it. The budget, of course, will be the big issue. And with a balanced budget requirement, how we divide up that pie again will be a big fight.
How about you? What do you think is going to be the big battles this year?
Well, I think you're right that money will be important, as it always is. Hopefully we've had a little boost this Christmas season, and with gas prices going down, maybe people will be spending a little bit more money. Maybe sales tax revenue will be up. I think it'll be good if we're able to sort of finish on a solid note, and that makes it easier to balance the budget.
Kevin, from the Democratic side, what do you feel are going to be the big challenges that you face in Pierre this year?
I think one of the things that will be a challenge is having less committee seats, and I think that's something that's going to be, really just working across the aisle and figuring out what kind of initiatives that we can pass, and also how do we, legislate from a smaller minority. But it hasn't been a problem. Well, there's been some challenges in the past, but I think we have really good bipartisanship on both sides of the House, and I think that's something that really we look forward to working with Republicans as well. So.
Now, Governor Daugaard proposed a $4.3 billion budget, $50 million added to the general fund, 2% raises proposed for schools, health programs, Medicaid provider payments, 2% raise for state employees, but no tax hikes. As you sat and listened to the budget address there at the beginning of December, what was your reaction to that? How much do you see that changing when it comes out the other end?
I think, being in the legislature going into my 7th and 8th year, there's always an increase, from what the governor proposes. So that's always going to be interesting to see what kind of asks come up from different community groups, and to see how we can get behind some of those, and especially, teachers' pay. I think that's a, big topic, and that's going to be something that is going to be addressed on several committees. I've served on state affairs, I served on the education committee, so there's different groups and there's different avenues to, kind of make those asks for for the teachers. And I think it's something that we can talk about and hopefully move forward on this session.
Craig, what was your reaction as you listened to Governor Daugaard lay out what his plan for the state's money is?
And I think that's the key, is that it is his plan. I think it's a good starting point. Frankly, I hope that the legislature maybe is a little bit more assertive than it has in past years, and maybe takes a little stronger position, and tries to reflect the needs of the legislature as they see it from their contacts with the people then in the final budget process. So I think we've got a good start, but it's a long ways till the end of March.
Brian, what was your react to what the governor laid out there at the beginning of December?
It's the 2nd year in a row he's left no money in the bottom line. So he spent every penny that he estimated would be coming in. It'll be interesting to see then how much additional comes in, if any, from a successful November, December shopping season. If those numbers are good, we will know early February if that's the case. Also, the unclaimed property amount is speculative, and that might come in greater, it might come in less, and then we have to adjust accordingly.
Now, the revenue projections were down for this year from what they initially had figured. How much of a challenge does that make for you guys with that much less to dole out?
Well, it does get difficult because if the numbers stay true to where the current estimates are, then revenues for the upcoming fiscal year are going to have to be adjusted accordingly. And we have a lot of needs in the state, and a lot of folks out there asking for a little extra help, and we'd like to be able to give it to them.
Craig, what kind of challenges does that pose with the revenues not what they had expected them to be for you guys to try to make ends meet?
Well, You know, I think we've got the big parts of the budget: education, health care, those sorts of things. And you know, governor's proposed a 2% increase, which for education, for example, which is slightly more than what the cost of living is. So even that small increase is a lot of money. So it doesn't leave much left for the rest of government. And as Brian has said, there's lots of asks out there. Many of them are good, and you know, it's up to the legislature to sort that out and decide what the priorities are at the end of the day.
Kevin, how do you look at that challenge? There's not as much to give out as you might like. How's the challenge of making it go?
I think that, you know, again, harking back on the legislative experience that, you know, I think all of us have on this committee, there's been times when we had a budget deficit, but we found ways to make ends meet and also increase different programs, you know, in different years. So I think that's, you know, from that experience, I think there is a challenge in you know, what's presented now in the budget is, as was mentioned earlier, is not going to be the case come March. So I think it's just trying to figure out what exactly the revenue projection are. And as mentioned earlier, is with the gas prices being lower, you know, I think that's going to help a lot, especially being in a rural state. I think people want to travel, they want to add more to the economy. So there's always that to kind of look forward to, and also that hopefully will help the ag areas, ag groups as well. So.
Now, the governor was proposing no tax increases for this year. Now, there's been some talk of increasing those to pay for transportation repairs in the state. How realistic is it to go through all of this without raising taxes, keep them as they are?
I would say, you know, that's always been a topic, you know, trying to figure out, you know, where do we raise taxes? You know, every year I've been in the legislature, that's always come up. And I think that's something that is going to continue to come up in trying to figure out, you know, how do you offset different expenditures? You know, let's say we have a down ag year, you know, or something like that. And then we figure out how to offset some of that with some revenue. And it's just topics up for exploration, I think. And that's something I think we can talk about Medicaid expansion. And maybe, you know, how do you add to that? But there's just different mechanisms to do some of this stuff. So.
Craig, is it realistic? Can you get everything you need to get done without raising taxes in South Dakota?
Well, I think that's the big question, I think. You know, at some point, someday, sometime in the future, maybe a tax increase somewhere is inevitable. But it could be a long time from now. I think South Dakotans are reluctant to raise taxes. I think this year, this is not part of the general fund, of course, but the transportation issue that you brought up, there's going to be a strong request made to make some investments in our roads and bridges in South Dakota and pay for it now rather than pay more for it later. So that, you know, that would be a tax increase, although it's not a tax increase that goes toward the general fund.
Is that a last resort, raising taxes? Is that one of the last things you guys want to do, or how do you look at the possibility of doing that?
You know, I think that's what South Dakotans expect, is that it has to be a last resort. They expect us to try to manage state government as efficiently as possible and provide the needs of our citizens in the areas that government should be involved in. And then, you know, at some point, if the state is no longer able to do that, then the option of tax increase comes up. But like I said, that could be sooner or it could be much later.
Brian, how do you see it? Do you see the taxes remaining as they are, or where are we going to end up? Do you think?
It's uncertain at this point. Part of it depends on what the federal government does with the Highway Trust Fund dollars. There's some uncertainty there. They may likely just kick the can down the road and do a one-year extension. You know, if that's the case, then we have a set number of dollars we can probably count on coming into the state, and then it depends on what our needs are. And I've asked the governor to make the case for that. If he's asking for additional dollars for that purpose, to go out there and talk to the public, provide the information, the facts, to support justifying that. And then if folks see the need, believe there's a need, then I think you can do something. But without that, I think it becomes very difficult.
All right, we'll continue our look at the 2015 session of the South Dakota State Legislature when we come back with this month's edition of Focus. I'm Jack Caudill. Welcome back to this month's edition of Focus, talking about the 2015 session of the South Dakota State Legislature. Representative Kevin Killer is a Democrat from District 27. He's from Pine Ridge. Some of the Democratic priorities were not included in the budget this year. They wanted some more money for teachers, expansion of the Medicaid program. What were your thoughts of that being left out, and what kind of things can you do with that?
Definitely. I think there's, room for growth in that, and yeah, it is 2.5 months, but I think there's always that conversation that will be raised, and I think that the the teachers and the Medicaid expansion folks are have a really good case, and I think with that being said, I recently lost my mom in October, right before the election, and unfortunately she had dialysis and all that kind of stuff, but she paid her, she paid her taxes her whole life. She worked from the time she was 15, and unfortunately, she had a stroke and had to file for disability. And and I can't help but think that if she was in a state that really, that had expanded Medicaid expansion, would the outcome be different? And so that's something that I think is a personal story, but I know I don't want that to happen to anybody else's family, and that's something that we really need to kind of examine that point and just keep elevating that conversation, because I think recently Tennessee expanded Medicaid into their communities. I know Kentucky did, and it's been there's been challenges, but also good things that come out of that. So that's something that I think could be kind of discussed a little bit more, and especially around teachers. I think teachers, we were able to give them an increase last year of $500, but they do good stuff. They do good things for our community, and they're pillars of our for our kids. And I think it's something that we can kind of continue to discuss and see how that conversation moves forward. So.
Senator Craig Teason is from District 34 here in Rapid City. From the Republican perspective, how do you guys view those expansion of Medicaid here in South Dakota? More money for teachers.
Yeah, I think there's mixed feelings on that. I sat on the work group a year ago last summer that looked into the expansion of Medicaid. The work group was done at the direction of the governor. Obviously, he chose not to expand Medicaid. I would say that I think there are some of us, and I'll include myself in the group, Republicans who are interested in discussing that further. Obviously, there are concerns, probably the biggest one being whether the federal government will be able to come through on its promise for their portion of coverage of expanded Medicaid. But I'm prepared to have that discussion. I think it could be in the best interest of South Dakota to try to figure out some sort of plan. And of course, the governor tried that last year and was unable to come to an agreement with the federal government. But I'm interested in doing that. In regards to education, I think the legislature's been very clear that we've tried to make as much money available as we could for education. We've increased education funding more than we've increased other areas of government. When we took the big cuts, we cut education less, but nonetheless, they continue to have needs. I think one of the big frustrations is regarding teacher pay is that the legislature doesn't set teacher pay. We provide money to local districts, and local districts make decisions about what to pay their teachers, and I think that sometimes increases the frustration.
And of course, that'll go back and forth again. The school districts say, well, yeah, but you don't give us enough money to raise it. Do you anticipate that same poll this year?
I'm guessing we'll have that same discussion, but I mean, clearly some of the money that we sent directed it, made it very clear that we wished it to be directed towards teachers last year. Now we're seeing audits, state audits that show that some districts simply increased their reserves and did not pay their teachers more. Well, that's very frustrating when that happens. I mean, it's not happening here in Rapid City, I can assure you, but other places around the state, it appears that it is, and that's a big frustration to the legislature.
And Representative Brian Gosch is the House Majority Leader. Where do you see things going this year? Medicaid expansion, more pay for teachers.
Yeah, I think it was laid out pretty accurately just a minute ago, and I think you'll probably see it go the same way that it did last year with Medicaid expansion. Big question, as was pointed out, can the federal government afford it? Can they live up to their promises with a $1 trillion plus deficit every year in the federal budget and rapidly approaching $18 trillion national debt? It becomes worrisome that they'll be able to live up to many obligations that the federal government has and the services they provide to the citizens of America. And it'd be easy for a state to say, well, we'll disregard that, we'll take the money, it'll help our economy, which would be true. You bring in over $100 million of economic activity into your state, you're going to help our economy, but what do you do to the country as a whole? Majority of states still haven't expanded Medicaid. I don't see it going anywhere this year. We did ask for a a waiver consideration to expand Medicaid slightly. The federal government refused that. So it might be something we try again to try to expand it a little bit, provide additional services for those in need, for those who can't take care of themselves. As far as the teacher pay goes, it's an ongoing battle. As Senator Teason pointed out, the teachers recognize that we don't set legislative pay. When we've talked about it from the legislative perspective, the school board superintendents have demanded that we stay out of it. They yell local control, don't set our budgets, don't set our teacher pay, let us do that. When I got into the legislature, my first session was in 2008. Rapid City General Fund Reserve Fund, for example, was at $8 million at the end of fiscal year 13. That'd be what, 5 years later? It was up to $16 million. It's now, I think the last I checked, it's down to about 13.7 million. And so you've seen some of that go on, and I don't know the ins and outs of their budget. And their reserves we're at about 21.7%, I think, at the $16 million level. State reserve funds are about 10%. And so there's that ongoing battle. What's the appropriate amount set, and how you allocate those resources and how you decide to spend that money?
I think when most people went to the polls in November, they thought that they were voting for the addition of craps, roulette, and Keno and Deadwood casinos, when in fact they were giving you guys the ability to approve that yourselves. Is that going to go anywhere? Will that go through, do you think?
Well, I think the fact that the citizens of South Dakota voted a majority to do that have put some weight on it. I think it has yet to be determined. Obviously, there are groups lobbying heavily against that sort of expansion. I personally have some concerns regarding the security of the gaming industry in South Dakota, but all those questions I think are going to be on the table. Obviously, and I think, again, since citizens voted to change the Constitution to make it possible, I think that sends us at least some message.
And Kevin, that would also apply to tribal casinos if that were to make it through the legislature. Do you see that going through in Pierre?
Yeah, I mean, I'm supportive of it, mostly from the aspect that, those are some of the only jobs that some of our communities have. And they're, and I think Prairie Wind Casino, for example, was able to add 250 jobs, for the casino operations. But with the expansion, it's going to increase, more employment for people in those communities, but also bring more revenue and be more competitive for the casino industry in South Dakota as a whole. In Deadwood, people that go down to Colorado play craps or whatever, roulette, they won't have to go down there. They can, stay in Deadwood or, hopefully stay at Prairie Wind Casino or something like that. So I think it's a good thing, and it's going to bring in more revenue. So that's always a good thing.
All right, we will wrap up our look at the 2015 session of the South Dakota State Legislature when we come back with this month's edition of Focus. I'm Jack Caudill. Welcome back to this month's edition of Focus, talking about the upcoming legislative session. Senator Craig Teason of Rapid City is with us. He is also the chairman of the State Corrections Commission. Criminal justice reform, one of the big things last year the legislature did. Do you know yet? Do you have a good feeling about what you did last year, whether that worked? Does more need to be done?
Well, I think the initial response has been good. The initial numbers that we've gotten from Department of Corrections are good. Our numbers, our prison population has flattened out. Because originally we undertook this project because we were worried about having to build a new prison. Looks like we can at least forestall that at this point. Again, it looks good. It takes some time to put the programs into place that we did in order to keep the people out of prison. But so far so good. I think good enough probably that we're looking at some juvenile justice reform this year.
What needs to be done in the juvenile system?
Well, probably Representative Gosch, he was actually served on that summer work group, but I think, frankly, it probably turns out to be some of the same things that we did in the adult side. More community corrections, providing more services locally, providing more services up front rather than sending people to prison or, in the case of juveniles, to the Department of Corrections.
What do you think needs to be done with the juvenile system?
I think Senator Teason described it accurately. That's right. There's a proposal now to put about $5 million investment in third-party providers in the community to offer services instead of getting those services in a state prison. The ongoing JDAI program, the Juvenile Detention Alternatives Initiative, continues. We've already seen reduction in amounts of recidivism and imprisonment in the juvenile detention centers at the county level, and some of those type of changes we're going to implement at the state level to reduce the number of kids we're sending to the Star Academy, the state-run prison facility for juveniles. provide those services in the community to help kids actually correct their behavior and at a higher success rate.
And Representative Kevin Killer from Pine Ridge, you happy with the way things went with the criminal justice changes last year?
I think it's good that there's a conversation going on about it, you know, in all the legislature, including, you know, with Senator Keesan's experience in the Rapid City area, and just the fact that, you know, serving on the Judiciary Committee with Leader Gosch, you know, there's just been an ongoing conversation since I came to the legislature, and it's good because, you know, that's what, you know, we don't want to put people in jail, you know, and I think that's something that, you know, we need to make sure that it's heard by everybody in the state. And thinking about, you know, where I'm from in Pine Ridge, you know, we have the federal issue where there's no resources at all for young people who go into federal corrections, you know, who have to go into some of these areas. There's no resources at all. So I think this might serve as a good model, you know, for potential funding from the feds, but also, you know, and we can be a leader in the country about, you know, how do we work with our juvenile populations, but also how do we get them to be productive members of society. And I think that's something that we're all aiming for, and it's a good conversation, and I look forward to working with everybody.
What about issues this year facing Indian country? One of those, voters in Shannon County, your district, have approved changing the name of the county to Oglala Lakota County. Legislature has to approve that. What are the issues facing that area?
I think something that we were dealing with is, again, healthcare, you know, and I think Chairman John Yelbert Steele proposed that, you know, we want to figure out how do we bring in Sanford Health, you know, into that area and into our community. But also, too, is that I did a bill several years ago is asking for a waiver, you know, from that if the state could provide a waiver to allow tribes to set up their own healthcare exchanges, that's a possibility. And I think when I'm looking at the mechanisms of under the ACA, the counties are allowed to set up their own exchanges. You know, multi-states are allowed to set up their exchanges, but how come tribes, being sovereign, can't set up their own exchanges? You know, and just work, you know, or just work directly with the federal government. So that's something that can be discussed, and you know, I'm not sure if it's possible, but at least as a state, you know, we can kind of highlight that conversation and figure out how do we kind of move forward around healthcare. So,
and Brian, the Republicans have a huge majority in both of the houses here. You hear all kinds of complaints about Washington, that the Republicans and Democrats are dysfunctional, can't work together. Do you guys do any better here in the state?
Well, I guess the voters are the judge of that, and you can be the judge of that. We're going to try hard to do better. The current House makeup is the largest ever since a 70-member chamber at 58 Republicans. It'll be interesting to see what those dynamics turn out to be with Republicans with different viewpoints and how they fight back and forth.
Kevin, how tough is it for you as a Democrat to try to get your voice heard?
I think it was a challenge at first, you know, and I think it was being able to figure out, you know, how do we come to agreement on things you know, we all want better for the people in the state of South Dakota. You know, I think that's the bottom line, and that's what I understood about coming into my final term in the House. You know, I think that's something that, because of term limits, and I think that's something that you learn, is that you learn to build partisanship. And, you know, at the end of the day, we all care about the same things. We just want to see things improved for everybody in the state of South Dakota. And I think, you know, with having that conversation, that frame of mind, you can get a lot done. You know, and I think it's something that you know, we're working towards around different issues, but, you know, it's something that we need to just keep focused on.
All right, we are completely out of time. Brian Gosch, Craig Teason, Kevin Killer, thank you guys for coming up. Enjoy the session up in Pierce starting on January 13th, wrapping up on March 30th when it is Veto Day. And that will do it for us. Thanks for watching. Hope to see you again the first Sunday night of next month. Good night.